Indian Health Service. The percentage of Indian Health Service ILI visits. For the national IHS, that was at 3.3%, and that is down 0.6% from the previous week. For the Nashville area IHS, currently we are at 3.2%, and that is down 0.8% from the previous week. For the percentage of ILI visits by age over here on the right, we can see from the age group 0 to 4, that is the highest percentage at 10.3, and then that kind of decreases as age increases there. For 65 and up, we are at about 1.8%. This map here on the top is the ILI activity by state level. You can see here we go level 1, which is kind of this bright green, all the way up to level 13 as the highest is this purple. We have the USET region kind of here in this moderate to high to some of the low area here. This is kind of trailing off as what we've seen in previous weeks. The percentage of outpatient visits for respiratory illness report, that's this bottom graph here. We can see our current season is this green line, so 2023 to 2024. We see we had a peak here near the end of the year, and it is dropping off and kind of steadying out as compared to previous years. For COVID-19, influenza, and RSV, we have a comparison graph here of these percentage of visits by week. So we have the combined in this red metric here as the highest one. This current week, we're at about 4.5%. The highest of those three other diseases is influenza at 2.9%, followed by COVID-19 at 1.5%, and then RSV at 0.2%. And we can see these are all kind of steadily declining here as the weeks go on. The percentage of respiratory visits by USET states, we have over here on the right in this yellow color as the United States as a whole at 4.5%. So if you are in our USET region in one of these states, you can kind of see, where your state is comparing. We have Rhode Island as the lowest at 2.6%, and then North Carolina at the highest at 5.5%. For influenza, this is specifically confirmed by laboratory testing. For the IHS regions here for vaccination on the left, we have our national in this first red line here hovering around 30.5%. And then compared to the Nashville area, we are at 30.9%, and that is patients who have received one dose of their seasonal influenza vaccine. For different age groups nationally, we have the total of everyone 6 months and up at 30.5%. Nationally, we have the highest age group here as 65 and older at 55.2%, followed by 50 to 64 years at 39.3%. Over here on the top left, we have a pie chart showing the different percentage of influenza A and influenza B. As seen by clinical laboratories, we are seeing a little bit of an increase in influenza B as compared to previous weeks. That's at about 41% now. On this other top comparison, we have the IHS Nashville area specifically for the seasonal influenza vaccine by age group. We have children 6 months to 17 years at 25.6%, and then those 65 and older at 58.1%. These bottom two charts go together, so we have the different HHS regions, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6, which are the ones in which our USET member tribal nations are located. We have the comparison week 7 to week 8, and then we have this percentage of new influenza hospitalizations comparison over here in this bar chart form. So we have week 7, which was the previous week in the black, and then week 8, which is the current week in the yellow. These are hovering pretty steady, just kind of decreasing as the weeks go on. So that is good news. For COVID-19, the current variant of concern, which is greater than 5%, is this Omicron lineage JN.1. That's been the same. And then our weekly COVID-19 case positivity rate for the United States, which is this yellow, and then the USET stage, which is this red. These are, again, kind of dropping off here at the same rate. We have the USET states as 8%, and then the United States as 7.4%. Our weekly COVID-19 hospitalization rate per 10,000 people on the left, we have our United States hospital admissions at 0.52 per 10,000 people, and then USET states as 0.6. And then on the right here, the weekly number of COVID-19 hospitalizations for the United States, we have about 17,000. And then for just those USET states, we have 7,289. Again, as always, we do offer a tribal nation specific report that would be customized and specific to your tribal nation, and that would be sent to you via email directly to your tribal leaders or your health director. And that would be customized. And you can just give us an email and opt in to receive these if you would like. And then if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask here, or you can take down our information. You can email me, I'm Anna, or you can email Greer, which is the other epidemiologist who really helps out on these reports. We have a QR code to our webpage if you want to learn more. And then we have our epi email if you'd like to reach the whole team. And that concludes the update.
Thank you, Anna. Do we have any questions at this time for Anna concerning her presentation? Hearing none, we can move on to Gabby Niski. And she is the Infectious Disease Program Manager.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Gabby Niski. I'm the Infectious Disease Program Manager here at USET. Today, we want to take a moment to recognize both National Women's and Girls HIV and AIDS Awareness Day that was on March 10th, a day to raise awareness about the impacts of HIV on women and show support for women and girls with HIV, as well as to introduce the National Native HIV/AIDS Awareness Day that is happening on March 20th, and which is a day to promote HIV testing, prevention, and treatment in American Indian, Alaska Native, and Hawaiian communities. In doing so, we have a short video of one of our Native Hawaiian partners, Kiva Lakadina, that shows their inspirational journey of overcoming HIV.
Whatever comes, you know I can take it, just as long as you.
It was impossible to hide. Being able to accept or even understand the struggle between my body and my mind was an impossible feat. But she was always there, my protector. My grandmother had been calling me a feminine version of my birth name since before I could remember.
Sorry, can y'all not see the video?
No, it's showing the disclosure screen on my end.
Sorry, I swear I shared the right. Can y'all see the video now?
Yeah, you just have to restart it.
Okay, yeah.
Surround me with love. Surround me with love. I know I can make it. Whatever comes, you know I can take it, just as long as you.
It was impossible to hide. Being able to accept or even understand the struggle between my body and my mind was an impossible feat. But she was always there, my protector. My grandmother had been calling me a feminine version of my birth name since before I could remember. I knew she prayed that one day I would find my direction and my spirit would be at peace. At 18, I walked into a bar in the Mission District of San Francisco. The instant feeling of acceptance and approval overwhelmed me. For the first time in my life, I found real friends, girlfriends. I was able to be myself and live freely in my skin. I separated myself more and more from my grandmother, my family, and my Hawaiian values. I morphed into this female thug by day, showgirl by night, a dope-smoking, sex-working diva. I was reborn. I went home to Richmond to get away from what was becoming a crazy, dead-end world. I went seeking my grandmother's shelter, but her time with us was coming to an end. For the next month, I would spend all of my time with her. We laughed, told stories, shared meals. She acknowledged my existence as a woman and told me how much I reminded her of my mother. For me, it was the ultimate validation. I carried her into the hospital with my own 2 arms. My grandma said goodbye to each and every one of us and transitioned to the next life. 8 years later, I was facing my own mortality. I had 150 T cells. The doctor came into my hospital room and gave me a choice. It was either death or start antiretroviral treatment. I decided to take the meds. I knew that I wouldn't be able to get better if I stayed in San Francisco, so I made plans to move closer to my mother and my Hawaiian roots in Honolulu. I got a case manager who helped me get connected. My care providers ignored all of the toxic components of my life at that time and focused on keeping me connected to support and medical care. It saved my life. I was undetectable within 4 months. Throughout those challenging times in my life, I always knew my grandmother was guiding and protecting me still. Today, I'm a national advocate and advisor for women like me. I use my story to empower and inspire others who may find those same challenges of living with HIV. I'm a mother and a grandmother, and the same unconditional love and protection I've learned from my upbringing, I give to my children and to my community.
I need you beside me. I want you to hold and hide me when this world is closing in on me. Surround me with love. I know I can make it. Whatever comes, you know I can take it. Just as long as you surround me with love.
Thank you, Brian. Wow, what a beautiful story, what a beautiful journey. The next part of the segment, we then will be coming into representing the National Native HIV Awareness Day. In doing so, we have Elton Naswood. And to give a brief bio, I would like to share that Elton is of the Near to the Water People clan, born for the Edgewater People clan His maternal grandfather's clan is of the Mexican people. His paternal grandfather clan is of the Triangle people. This is how he is Navajo Dene. He's originally from White Horse Lake, New Mexico, on the Navajo Reservation, and currently resides in Denver, Colorado. Mr. Naswood is an independent consultant and formerly a senior program analyst in the Capacity Building Division at the Office of Minority Health Resource Center. He previously was a capacity building assistant specialist at the National Native American AIDS Prevention Center and was formerly founder and program coordinator for the Red Circle Project, AIDS Project Los Angeles. He is currently a member of SWIC Two-Spirit LGBTQ Advisory Council and is a United States representative leader for the International Indigenous Working Groups on HIV and AIDS. And Brian, did you want to do the 2 videos as intro?
Yes. So I'm waiting for it to load.
One of the important things that I carry are my cultural values. Being able to understand myself as a Native person really allows me to balance myself in the world that I live in. So I'm very proud to be Native American, but also very proud to be Navajo.
Sorry, I don't know why it's not loading. There we go.
There is a traditional Native American phrase that says, "You have not lived life unless you lived in another person's moccasins." I like that phrase because it really adds to the understanding of diversity, that everyone should be able to accept and walk in other people's moccasins.
Thank you, Brian. And now we will have Elton give his presentation. The floor is yours, Elton.
Thank you, Gabby, and thank you, Brian. And thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm going to go ahead and formally introduce myself as we're getting the PowerPoint ready. Yat Esha Elton Naswe and Shia, Tohan Enchna Tabaha Bashishin, Nakaidene Deshiche Tetness and Edishanala, Dia Dene Enchla. And what I said was in Navajo, basically the translation of how Gabby introduced myself in terms of my 4 clans. So I am of the Near to the Water clan, born for the Edgewater clan. My maternal grandfather's clans of the Mexican people and my paternal grandfather's clans of the Tago people. So I was taught at a young age to introduce myself in that way when I'm given the opportunity to speak to other people, even if it's virtually now that we're doing. But our clanships, like I like to mention, are a way of connecting each other in terms of our relationships, particularly in Navajo. And then to my non-native relatives on the Zoom, I often compare clanships to like American last names, right? When we're born, we take our father or the father's last name. When there are marriage ceremonies, typically the wife takes the husband's last name. And that's because in America, we live in a patrilineal society, right? For Navajo, we live in a matrilineal society. So the clanships that I explained to you, how honor the female lineage in which I carry. So I honor my grandmother, my great-grandmother, with the clanships that I am a part of. So with that said, I did my cultural responsibilities, and now I will go into my presentation. So I was contacted by Brian, to help to present on this presentation in recognition of the National Native HIV/AIDS Awareness Day. And it took me a while to think about what to present. And then I realized I have all this knowledge. I turned 50 this year, so that means, I'm becoming an elder. So I realized that, I have all this knowledge and this work that I have done in the past. So I wanted to speak about, the beginning of my work in HIV prevention, when I lived in Los Angeles, and being credited of being the founder and, the program coordinator or the director of the Red Circle Project, was really meaningful in my life, because it was the first time, after I got out of grad school, that I had a professional career that really impacted me, not only personally as Native and being a two-spirit gay man, but also allowing me to connect to my urban community that I lived in when I lived in Los Angeles. So this, the title of this presentation is Cultural Healing Practices, HIV Prevention in the Urban Indian Community. And this is just one example, of some of these programmings that had developed in our urban populations. Next slide. I feel like the Wizard of Oz. Hey, next slide. So some of the challenges that I saw when I, developed the program was that one of the main issues that I encountered was living in an urban area, and everything was not just Navajo, right? It wasn't just my worldview. It was more of a combination of understanding other individuals' worldview, and hence the commercial that was shown, walking in someone's moccasins, was really meaningful to me, because I had to understand the clients that I was serving who came from different tribal communities. And particularly one of my own personal challenges was understanding and getting to know the California Indian community, right, outside our urban communities. So like particularly in Los Angeles, where I live and where this program was developed, we had the Gabrielino Tongva, and understanding that they were not a federally recognized tribe, but more of a cultural group seeking federal recognition, that really had an impact on how I saw my own worldview and how I had to acknowledge, that I was in a land that wasn't Navajo, right? Which impacted me even more in when I was developing the project, was really taking in different aspects and cultural understandings of different tribal communities, whether it was in California, the Southwest, and even out from the Dakotas, in which were places where my clients came from. There was no specific intervention at the time for Native populations. This was the time when all funding through CDC was based upon these EBIs, right? Effective behavioral interventions. And then we got these interventions and we said, okay, where's the Native part? Where's the cultural part? And there really wasn't any. And, the continued education, that we have to do with our partners, particularly our funding partners, is something that becomes a challenge, but most times, there is a lot of support that we have, and there's always a need for education, right? So some of these interventions didn't have these worldviews, and then we got to understand, like, to become an effective behavioral intervention, it takes more than 5 years. There's got to be a research component, a part of this. And we in the urban community were like, but our people are, having to deal with something right now, right? We can't wait 5 years for a non-Native perspective to say this is effective, right? We need to do something now. So that was my perspective. And then hence the reason why we developed what we call the homegrown intervention, or community responsive intervention, there at the Red Circle Project, that helped us to get, which enabled us to give more HIV education, but in a cultural perspective, right? With a shared cultural worldview. Next slide. So just talking about the urban Indian populations, and I feel sometimes that's a slang term, what is an urban Indian, right? Those type of things. But, these are just individuals who are part of tribal nations that live outside their reservations, outside their villages, in areas like Los Angeles, Denver, where I'm at currently, Minneapolis, Baltimore, New York City, etc. And interesting enough, a part of these communities exists because of a federal policy of the um, um, federal policies in the 60s and the 70s that was really luring Native people from their tribal communities into urban settings by the federal government, saying that we'll give you a job, we'll give you housing, and it was a part of this assimilation movement at the time. So hence we have generations of families that live in these areas still, in Los Angeles being one of them. I met families that went back 3 generations, right? And that were a part of this relocation assimilation policy that the US government had. And now we see that there are over 70% of our Native relatives that live in urban areas, and about 30% that still live on reservations and or other trust lands. And these are just estimates. I think the latest census had us at almost 80% now living away from our communities. So we have a significant population in our urban areas. And some other issues that I saw, particularly when developing this program, was migration issues, which really became which really was an issue, I think, that particularly for our Native LGBTQ Two-Spirit community happens more often, whether it's, for the reasons of acceptance, for the reasons of education, for schooling, and then for some of our relatives for sex work, right? So we really saw this migration happening, particularly Los Angeles, along the freeways, the interstate highways have been able to migrate back and forth. And then identity, obviously, people who were Native or maybe not have been enrolled, and understanding who they are and helping them through that. And then also coming up with a intertribal pan-Indian per se perspective, right? What are these general, quote unquote, common understandings, worldviews, practices that we all share as Native people? Next slide. So in terms of HIV prevention and some urban-based issues, again, mentioning that there are about 70% of us that live in urban areas. So a lot of the times, individuals like myself who were raised on the reservation but have lived away since, their adulthood per se, and I consider myself an urban Indian, there's always that understanding of balance of my worldview, balance in my thought processes of this bicultural way of life, right? And it took me a number of years to understand that it's okay being a Native living in an urban setting, but how do you balance that within yourself, culturally, getting up before the sun, offering prayers, do I still do that, or what are the things that I need to be able to do? The access to services is a lot easier. Access to grocery stores is a lot easier. So balancing all that out can become an issue and can actually have an effect on a person's mental health and mental understanding in that way as well. It's just trying to balance, your way of living. I mentioned again, intertribal perspectives. I mentioned briefly the migration about going back to the reservation and going back to the reservations and then coming to an urban area, then vice versa as well. What we found was that the perspectives from some clients were like, oh, I'm going to move to an urban area so I can get a job and people will accept me for who I am, particularly our Native LGBT Two-Spirit clients. But also, for those who were HIV positives or people living with HIV, they felt like they could blend in and get services a little bit more easier in an urban area. Whereas living on the reservation, the confidentiality, the interrelatedness of people being, related, and the stigma also played an effect with people being able to get their care, and then just access to care. It was just easier for them easier, quote unquote, for them to get their care in an urban area. Some people didn't have to, get a special ride to go 20 miles to the nearest IHS. They could just catch a bus or public transportation. And I did mention stigma as well. And then also just people's involvement in programs, hence the reason we called it the Red Circle Project, because it seemed more inviting. HIV wasn't a part of the group's name. People didn't feel stigmatized. So it really allowed them to come and be in that space. And then also for those that identified as Native LGBT Two-Spirit as well. So they were able to access the services that we provided. Next slide. So the project began as an HIV prevention program in 2003 at APLA Health and Wellness, which is one of the largest HIV organizations in the country. So being able to have a program specifically for American Indian Alaska Natives in Los Angeles County was kind of a new feat, not only for them as an agency, but for even the Native community as well, because, APLA, it implies, it's just a large organization. So there was a lot of collaborations that we had to do between the agency as well as with our community partners, which developed over the years. It was the only HIV prevention program for our American Indian Alaska Native and our Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ plus community in Los Angeles. It was, these are two populations that are very, particularly in Los Angeles County, very hard to reach per se, just reaching American Indians in such a large space of Los Angeles County, which is over 4,750 square miles. So it's a huge area to cover. But also being able to outreach to Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ individuals, right, within that community. So it was kind of like a double layer of outreach in which we had had to find the people we were looking to serve. And luckily we were able to do that. And a part of that was just community building, word of mouth, people knowing other individuals, and then also outreaching to our non-Native agencies as well, our HIV agencies, our housing agencies. We were able to get referrals. And then beyond that, with these collaborating agencies, of course, obviously there was a little bit more education that I had to provide to them about Native identity, Indian health services, which allowed me to go out into the quote unquote professional agencies to provide that. But making that connection was really kind of instrumental in starting the program and having the handful of clients that we were able to support and have. And I'll come back to the housing collaboration in a minute. It was a successful thing that happened as a part of the program, I feel. And we just provided HIV 101 classes, prevention workshops, and cultural activities to support our clients and communities. And we made that one-on-one hands-off referral to our own case management and treatment services that we had there at the agency. Next slide. So when I was discussing, not everything was Navajo, because that's actually what the client said to me. They're like, Alton, we love you, but everything is not Navajo. I don't understand a lot that you say. So I had to kind of take that hat off, that hat off and kind of just be more willing to listen and to get more feedback. And one of the things that happened as a part of that feedback was I realized that we all share as Native people this holistic wellness understanding. There are common cultural components that we also share, the 4 directions, the 4 colors. Some tribes have clanships that are based on 4 communities. Navajo, which is the image at the bottom, we have 4 mountains that we believe our people are situated between. Those have their own colors and stones. So, just with those discussions, we had this common understanding of holistic wellness, these elements that were the same that we shared amongst our own communities. And hence, having that understanding, I realized holistic wellness was represented in the medicine wheel, which I learned prior to that. So I connected the medicine wheel with kind of these cultural understandings of holistic wellness and kind of presented and developed the program and ultimately a homegrown curriculum that we developed to provide the education as we did. Next slide. And the basic understanding of holistic wellness is putting everything back in balance, right? You know, there are things that make our world unbalanced, but there are things that make us balance again. And there was a whole Navajo story that I shared, hence the reason they said everything isn't Navajo. But it goes back to that notion that we have Hajo in Navajo, which is the good, the beauty way. Then we have the Hochfo, which is the opposite, which is the negative way, the bad way. But we have these songs, these ceremonies, these dances, these prayers, these actions that we do as individuals that help us to balance that worldview, right? So, and the bad part is, and then I had clients say, well, how come there's a bad part? You know, and I was like, because there's always that duality that we live in, right? And your own cultural stories will help to explain that. The seasons, right? There are reasons why we have seasons. So I had to explain that to individuals from my own thought processes, right? And then a part of that was developing what we called strengthening the circle curriculum. Myself and a colleague of mine, who many of you may have heard of, Maddie Jim, who is a native transgender advocate that lives in New Mexico. And she actually runs her own program as well. But we helped to develop this curriculum based on the medicine wheel, which, you know, really worked in an urban setting because everyone could relate to it in their own cultural way. You know, we took on instances of historical trauma, right, which for some of our clients was a new concept or understanding that they kind of were introduced to as well. And then the curriculum used theories on trans theoretical model, behavior change, cognitive social theory, and the health belief model as well. We learned those theories from a colleague of mine at APLA. You know, Maddie and I had no training in curriculum development. We were just advocates, outreach, you know, that was our background. So really coming together and developing this was a good process for us, you know, for us to learn how to develop curriculum. And hence, you know, we came up with this model. We developed it into 4 different workshop components. Next slide. We started out with the emotional to kind of set the stage, introduce historical trauma, having people to understand their emotions that affect their decision making, what risks are out there in terms of HIV. So we kind of introduced these heavy concepts to begin with, just to get everything out. One thing we learned when we did our first couple of workshops is we weren't prepared for people's reactions once they understood historical trauma, right? Once we begin to unravel that, we had to process it with them after the workshop at one point, and we realized we had to be able to provide resources to them, right? Whether it was a phone number or connecting them to our mental health services if needed, but we weren't prepared at the beginning for that reaction they had to that. Right. And that's what I think with historical trauma, even for our own Native relatives, yes, there's that understanding that the past affect us, but are we ready to accept that? Are we in a space of our own to accept those issues, right? And it also goes back to being a provider, right? If you haven't healed, how can you heal others, right? I kind of use that concept in explaining historical trauma as well. And we did that, you know, and we incorporated some interactive activities with them where people can introduce themselves, feel comfortable, all of that stuff in the first workshop. Next slide. And then the second workshop was on protecting the circle, which was more talking about physical. So that's when we brought in HIV, STIs, transmission, a lot more of the understanding of HIV from a medical perspective on how it affects us physically, transmission, the different modes of transmission, and then also beginning to introduce harm reduction strategies here too, and then increasing their skills of condom use, barriers, access to. At this time, PrEP was just beginning to be developed, which I wasn't on the bandwagon then, but I'm on the bandwagon now. But those were those skills we were introducing as well. Well, the only reason about PrEP was I was like, they didn't do that to our Native people, and then just that historical trauma of all of that. But then I got to meet Dr. Anthony Fauci, and he got me on the bandwagon, and PrEP is wonderful. Anyway, I digress. Next slide, please. Then the third workshop was on mental, and this is where we began to really talk about prevention and harm reduction strategies, and then also begin to talk about their healthy image. How do they see themselves as a Native, as a gay male, and then ultimately as a Native gay male together collectively. And some of the conversations that we had with that identity part of it really helped to understand kind of how their behaviors, interactive. Like some of our Native men, felt like being gay meant to be buff and to go to the gym and, to go to the bars type of thing. We kind of had to unravel that and really talk about, okay, but then what does it mean to be a Native gay man? Or, what spaces are you in there? So some of the conversations were really interesting, but it ultimately helped them to understand themselves and give them a positive sense of identity. And then also talking about risk behaviors, identify some risk reduction methods as well. Next slide. And then, the last one was just bringing everything together, the spiritual part. And I had to explain spiritual, well, I didn't have to, but my way of explaining spiritual to my clients was that spiritual is everything that makes you feel good, right? Things that a tree, the weather, your pets, your partner, your family, those things that's all spiritual. That's that spiritual connection you have. Right. And so explaining that really helped them to understand and get in touch with who they were as a Native person, particularly as a Native gay man. And then, obviously we introduced some stages of change during that part, and then just bringing everything together. And, a lot of the times we had this, what I like to call aha moment, because people didn't kind of collectively, I say people, but the clients or the participants of our workshops didn't collectively bring HIV and their cultural understandings together, where they were like, oh, wow, this is how it affects me, right? And bringing those instances of historical trauma, identity, and then bringing in those HIV prevention skills, stages of change, risk behavior, which made it a thing for me. I believe as a trainer, made them feel a little bit more comfortable, and it helped them understand a little bit more rather than utilizing a lot of medical terms and medical presentations. And then this is specifically for a project, this curriculum, these 4 workshops. And then ultimately different Native agency asked us to come in to provide the same workshops, not necessarily for our Native LGBT Two-Spirit community, but for instance, we adapted these workshops to our Native women. So we had a Native women's group at one of our agencies. So we brought in this information, adapted it to their community, and the same experience. And then an interesting experience that I had as a trainer too was we had a treatment center in Long Beach, California, predominantly Native men, and then they had maybe 2 transgender individuals at that facility. And we went in and we provided this training, and, a lot of these men, stoic, just sitting there, and I'm up there, being a Two-Spirit male, being myself, talking about, condoms and dildos and all that stuff. And I swear, did just that first workshop I did with them, they were very stoic. By the end of the workshop, or by the end of the series, they were all my friends. They were telling me about what they used to do at the bars with the women and all of this. And, I made that connection, but, I think it's just the way you present the information, that has an impact. I felt like I had to get kind of not talk so trainer-like, but more as a layperson with them per se. But it was just, at least for me as a trainer and, you know, my own identity working with a population like our Native men, particularly in a treatment center, kind of opened my eyes on how these workshops were effective, right? Because we were able to get through to some of these individuals that had these past experiences. So anyway, I digress again. Next slide, and we have 10 minutes. So spiritual health, you know, everything that I kind of talked about there, as part of our oral traditions, everything is interconnected. There's always that good wellness, and then, you know, there's that unbalance, which sometimes we think, you know, as HIV kind of being that negative part of that wellness and balance, but it's all that circle. You know, how do we bring that mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual together, right? And then providing cultural healing is also important. So if we do referrals to sweat lodges or to powwows or cultural activities for your clients, that's also good. The one thing I often tell providers, though, is when you're working with our Native LGBTQ Two-Spirit clients or population, be sure you know and you trust those cultural providers that are providing those services, because sometimes they can re-traumatize them. An instance that I say that I had was I had a trans male individual who was going to participate in Sweat Lodge, and the person running the Sweat Lodge said, no, you have to put on a skirt. So this is what became known as skirt shaming, that individuals in our community who go for healing to places like a Sweat Lodge aren't allowed because they're not wearing this Western connotation of wearing a skirt, right? So be careful, be cautious on who those advisors are, and let them know that if you're making a referral, particularly for our Native LGBT Two-Spirit clients, that they are aware and that space is safe for them, that cultural space, right? So that's what I always like to mention as well. Next slide. And then some of the cultural activities we did with our population was urban areas. That's where we see other Indian people. So we attended powwows, we did outreach. We actually collaborated with an agency who brought up their big HIV testing mobile testing unit to the powwows. That was an interesting experience during outreach and providing testing services, because we got, at the beginning, we had community members come up and say, why are you doing this? You're not, this isn't right. You shouldn't be talking about HIV. This isn't the place. So we had to do a lot of education. And one way we did that was we reached out to the elders, and the elders were the ones that kind of sat with us at the booth at first and kind of explained. And we had one elder, she was amazing. She would take a whole bunch of condoms, go out to the young people and just say, hey, or you need this, and by reaching out to the elders, we gained that trust of our community, but of our powwow committees. So by the end of my reign at the project, these powwow committees were calling us and say, hey, we have a space for you. Can you come? We have space for the van. We want to be able to provide this. So it really changed, but that trust and who to reach out to your community is also important. So the elders were our key. And then we had that one, I used to call her a crazy elder, but she was like one of those aunties, right? We all have that one auntie. She was like that, but she was great. And then we developed our own powwow in the city of West Hollywood with the council support. We ran this powwow for about 9 years. We didn't term it a Two-Spirit powwow. We called it a community powwow because we felt like our Two-Spirit community was always a part of the community, right? And so everyone came. It turned out it was always an awesome event. And once I left the project to work for the Office of Minority Health, I would come back annually to the powwow. And like even up to this day, if I were to go to a powwow, I had old clients come up to me and be excited and let me know, I'm sober now, I'm in a treatment center, I'm getting, I'm on my meds, and it was just an amazing feeling to build that community. Next slide, please. And then this was all before we had apps and Grindr and all that too, while we were transitioning in. But we did digital storytelling, which was a really good practice. There are a couple of stories that some clients have done. Actually, if you look at the picture to the left with the guy that's kneeling, that's Tommy Orange. You all know Tommy Orange, the author, native author who wrote the book. He wrote his second book. Anyway, he started out in HIV prevention. I always like to say that. That's Tommy Orange. So anyway, he helped with that digital storytelling. It helped our clients tell their stories, which was really great. Then the clients wanted to meet, so we began to do talkie circles twice a month with our Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ. We expanded the program as well to serve our Native transgender clients. And we had specific programming for them that my colleague Maddie Jim at the time ran. And then I mentioned our Sweat Lodge ceremony. We had a great Choctaw elder who would invite us to his Sweat Lodge for my clients to be able to utilize and use, and they felt safe. So he was really good. And yeah, next slide. Yeah. So if there are any questions, we have about 5 minutes left, I think, or so. But I kind of just gave you, a look about the project. Unfortunately, the project has ended about 2 years ago, but the services for our community are still being provided by our Urban Indian Clinic, United American Indian involvement as well. So yeah, this is just a great a great time for me to reflect on what I was able to contribute and still able to contribute. And a lot of these issues are still prevalent in our community. Funding is obviously one of the big issues. Unfortunately, like the Red Circle Project that had to move on to an IHS clinic. But then, there are other programs like the Native American AIDS Project in San Francisco that had to close down as well. So there were a number of places that are no longer in existence, but the services hopefully are still being provided.
That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Elton. I did have one question. You talked about the curriculum. Couldn't say the word. Do you have like that curriculum written down anywhere that you could provide?
Yeah, I'd be more than willing to provide. At one point, there was, we were wanting it to get more funded so we could, have different tribes utilize it if they wanted to. But the curriculum is amazing, and if you all want to adapt it too, it was amazing in the way that we developed it too, because you can adapt it. Like I said, we adapted for different populations. So we adapted to Native women, but then we also were able to leave space there for tribal specific parts in the curriculum, say. So if the Apache tribe wanted to utilize it, they could insert their worldviews into some of the activities that we had there. Yeah.
Great. That'd be great. Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Elton?
No, that was really great, Elton. That was my question, is to see if we could get the curriculum to send with that email. That would be great to share.
Okay,
Was
yeah.
such a good work. Very good work.
Thank you. And I miss being there, I guess, but
Your legacy lives on.
yes, but it's still great. I mean, like I said, I still keep in contact with a number of clients. And unfortunately, as in the work that we do, some of our clients do do journey on, and, I think at the time when I was a direct service provider, that was the hardest part of the work that I did, was losing one of your relatives that was a part of your circle. And at my time there at APLA, I believe I was there for like 13 years. We lost 3 relatives at the time, but we gave them space, we gave them, a place to be, and, their memory lives on. But, I think that was another challenge, at least for me, to go through. But to have clients, when I go back and visit, whether it's for a powwow, to say, I'm doing good, I'm in sobriety now. And, oh, and another thing we taught, we would do a workshop, we would use the 3 Ps, protect your pink parts, right? So that was something Maddie gave up. And at the powwows, we would be walking around, or I would be walking around, and the little like the teenagers would be, there's Mr. Pink Parts, there's Mr. Pink Parts. Oh, I was so embarrassed. But I'm like, well, they're understanding what that meant, right? But to have that name was kind of funny.
Whatever
Benefiting.
makes it click in their head.
It did. I'm like, oh, it's funny. But I just also want to acknowledge the National Native HIV/AIDS Awareness Day on the 20th. If you're having any activities, I also participated with the National Native HIV Network as well. So they have a lot of resources, I believe, new posters and images for the event on their website. So continue to promote the day, and hopefully we'll get spring soon. Well, not in Denver, it's going to snow tonight.
Oh.
But we're going to get a foot of snow.
Oh, gosh.
I know, it's crazy. All right, any other questions, comments? Thank you, Gabby. Yes, that's the National Native HIV Network's website. All right, yeah, I'll definitely look through my files and find the curriculum that I could send to you.
Okay.
And feel free to share.
Great. Thank you so much. Just a reminder to fill the survey out. There's the link in the chat. And you'll also be directed to it when you close out of here. Yeah, so I'll see you next month. Gabby, do you want to introduce next month's topic?
Yeah, sure, I can. Just briefly, so next month will be based on shingles, and we will hopefully have John Hopkins speaking about traditional healing in regards to shingles, and have the other side of the Western medicine with Dr. Jorge Mira from Cherokee Indian Nation.
Yep. And that is on April
10th?
10th?
Yes, April 10th,
Yep.
same time, 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern.
Well, everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Hilton.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.